Okay. Recording in progress. That's kind of scary. So, hello and good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy that you're here. Are some of you here for the first time? Some, I don't know, I can't see. But if you are, you can get on our mailing list by going to interfaith.interconnect@gmail.com, and then you will find out about all the things we're doing. And every month we have a religion chat. So it is our custom that we always state our mission statement, and it is to enrich, inform, and educate ourselves and others about the great diversity of faiths and cultures in our valley. So today is the final program in our series of 4 programs on holy books or other texts that are important to your religion. And I was thinking about that. And you know, we felt a little bit nervous because, gee, you know, will people continue to come to these presentations, because there's a number of them. And we were so pleased to see that people did come. And I found a quote the other day that meant something in this regard. And it is, curiosity is the wick in the candle of learning. And I think all of us that come to these sessions are a group of curious people. And I think we're people who will hopefully learn all our lives. So I want to introduce our speakers to you. The first speaker will be Parima Shah, and she will speak about the Jain book, Atma Siddhi, Liberation of the Soul. And then after her, Mr. Gaurav Rastogi will speak about texts important to the Hindus. So are you ready, Parima, to speak? Okay, so you're on.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction, Ruth. And I'm so excited to be here and to share a little bit about Atma Siddhi Shastra with all of you. So before we dive into what Atma Siddhi Shastra is, I want to talk about Jainism and scriptures. So why does Jainism have scriptures? What is the need for scriptures? What is the purpose behind having scriptures as a part of our religion? And so there's 3 main things that scriptures provide to Jains. One is inspiration. So it shows us the path. It inspires us to walk the path. The second thing is that it prepares us for a live guru. It prepares a person to receive from a live guru. And then third thing is that it gives us disciplines. So in these texts, it describes like the do's and don'ts of what we're supposed to follow in our day-to-day life. And so what exactly is considered a scripture? So anything that's written in prose by an acharya, upadhyay, or sadhu. So an acharya is someone who is the head of a congregation. Upadhyay is a religious teacher, and a sadhu is like a monk or is a monk. Any of this is anything written by these 3 types of people is called a shastra or a scripture. That, and also any text written out of enlightenment by someone who is enlightened. And there's many examples of, in fact, householders who were enlightened, who wrote texts that are considered scriptures. And the one that we're going to be talking about today in particular is Sri Atma Siddhi Shastra. And so let's like go into like the basics of what exactly is in this shastra, in the scripture. So I think first let's start off with, it was written in 1895. So you can see that's really quite recent when thinking about text, when thinking about scriptures. It was written almost like less than 125 years ago. And so it was written in Gujarat by the enlightened master Srimad Rajchandra Ji. The language of the region was called Gujarati. And so it was originally written in Gujarati. And the style is that it's 142 two-line verses. So it's a really short scripture. So you can imagine like what exactly is discussed in the scripture? What is the scripture about? And to answer that, let's take a look at the title of the book, which is Atma Siddhi Shastra. So if you break the title down into pieces, Atma translates to self, Siddhi translates to realize or attain, and Shastra translates to scripture. So the subject matter of the book, what these 142 verses is talking about, is this topic of self-realization. This book is about how do you realize yourself? Who are you? That is the subject matter of the scripture. So just wanted to note that there's a lot of texts out there that in both the Hindu and in the Jain traditions that have the word Siddhi as a part of the title, because Siddhi just means to realize or attain. So in the Hindu philosophy, there's Advait Siddhi, Brahma Siddhi, and then in the Jain philosophy, there's Sarvat Siddhi, Anikant Siddhi, Sarvagna Siddhi. Like these are all examples of texts that have the term Siddhi in the title. And so it's a, just wanted to highlight this word. And so without further ado, we can go into more details behind the context of the book, but I really want to talk about what is this book all about? And I really want to make this section interactive. So let's jump into a game. So for this game, I will request all of you guys to join me at this link, which I am putting into the chat. If you could click on that link and join, we're going to be doing like a poll, and this is how you can cast your votes. So I'll give you around 1 minute to join on the link. Oops.
Reader, do you?
I guess if I had phone.
Yes, providing you take the phone and if you have the app, then it can read this.
And so once you're on the link, we can get started. So here's the first question I have for you. So what spiritual questions do you have? And let me start the poll. So is a spiritual question that you have, why me? Like why do certain things happen to me? The second question is, who am I? Like what is my true, like who am I truly? Third one is, where does true happiness lie? And lastly, what happens after death? So go ahead and cast your votes, and we can see the votes kind of rolling in. I'm curious to see what spiritual questions people have. Karen, I'll hide it for now, so not to influence. Oops. All right, with all the votes in, okay, so it seems like the most popular question is where does true happiness lie? So does someone from this like group of people want to raise their hand and explain why this might be something that's pressing on your mind? Oh, are people having issues with the audio? Is everyone can hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay, great. So does anyone want to share like or does anyone want to share like what question they have on their mind? What spiritual question that they have? All right. Well, yeah, I guess what I want to share is like all of these questions, like why does certain things happen to me? Who am I? Where does true happiness lie? What happens after death? All of these questions are answered in this one text in 142 verses. So the topic, the scripture deals with these specific questions in particular. On the second slide, out of curiosity, what do you value the most? Service, happiness, humility, or knowledge? So if you guys could cast your votes. I think Rupal Gandhi has raised her hand.
The questions are different from what's being written here.
Oh, okay. Okay, is it this question?
Yes. It's that one.
Okay. So I guess let's just skip that question. What problem do you see with so-called spiritual people today? So the first one is like mechanical ritualists. You see people who are just like performing rituals mechanically without any meaning. Do you see dry intellectualists who spout philosophy but don't really practice what they preach? Do you see people who have blind faith who don't really question what they believe or take things with blind faith? Or do you see saints that lead people astray? So let's take a look at what everyone's voted. So I think the most common thing we see is blind faith, and yeah. So in this book, in this scripture, the author Srimad Rajchandraji, he talks about these pitfalls that spiritual people might face on the path. Spiritual people might fall to following rituals mechanically, or they might just spout philosophy, or they might just blindly follow things. And so he gives us ways to identify these tendencies within us, and then he gives us a method to eradicate these tendencies within us. So this is another topic that's kind of discussed through the text. The next question is, what appeals to you the most? Like an understanding of the 6 philosophies, religions of India, a story of a guru or of an enlightened being and his or her disciple, a philosophical debate, or an expression of love and devotion. So yeah, so as the votes roll in, it looks like to most people, the story of an enlightened being and his disciple, his or her disciple, is what appeals most. And the incredible thing about Atma Siddhi Shastra is that it discusses all of these 4 things. It gives us an understanding of the 6 philosophies of India. It's written in a format that describes the relationship between a guru and disciple. It's written in a dialogue between a guru and the disciple. There's a philosophical debate in which the disciple poses doubts to the guru, and then the guru responds with answers. And at the very end, after the disciple has attained all of has gotten all of his doubts answered, there's an expression of love and devotion, which is actually taken as a prayer for many people of the Jain faith. And so it's incredible that in only 142 verses, all of these 4 different topics are covered. So moving on, I also wanted to play this other game with you guys and kind of get you guys thinking about different philosophical questions. So I'm going to ask you myth or fact. So do you believe I have a soul? And I'll have you, oh, whoops, sorry.
Oh.
There we go. I have a soul. So myth or fact? So a lot of people are saying fact, and 1 person has said myth. All right. I would like a volunteer from the audience. Who here thought it was a myth?
That was me.
Okay, so why do you think it's a myth?
Well, it's not I have a soul, but I am a being. The question is, what is my individuality? And that's the thing that's always debated in the Hindu tradition, as you know, as well. So whether I have a soul is questionable. Whether I am a being is definitely not questionable. So
Exactly.
that's where I come from.
Exactly. And so I think, so one of the things that I kind of wanted to get at this question is that this text talks about identification, that I am a soul, and what does it actually mean to be a soul? And so it delves into this concept of identification. Next question. My karma and destiny are predetermined. So is this a myth or is this a fact? What are you guys' thoughts? So a lot of people are saying it's a myth, and 2 people said that it's a fact. So can someone from like the fact side defend their argument?
I'm on the myth side, but I'll speak for the fact side. Usually, the understanding is that whoever created this universe created time with the universe. So they are obviously outside of time, which means time and all the transformation that comes with time are part of the creation, which means that everything is predetermined. That's how it's interpreted on the fact side.
So, and then for the myth side, I know that you voted myth. So why did you vote myth?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. More detailed answer, but we do have an ability to act. That's the essentiality of our being. The ability to choose our action, however little, is still there, and that part is the fact part, the myth part, which is our actions and the consequences of those are not predetermined to the extent that we have the ability to choose. That ability to choose is very narrow, but there's some of it that still remains.
Yeah, absolutely. So like from Atma Siddhi Shastra, half of the statement is true and half of the statement is false. So my karma is predetermined, but my destiny is not predetermined. And so to explain this a little bit more, what Sri Atma Siddhi says is that, for example, like the fact that it's going to rain is predetermined. That is something that you cannot change if it's going to rain. But it is what does change is my choice to either cry in the rain or to dance in the rain. That is my choice. That is my free will. And so it kind of delves deeper into this philosophical concept of like what between fate and free will. That's another concept that's covered in this text. Next question is, a lot of time and effort is required to traverse the spiritual path. So let's see, myth or fact? So let's see what people are rolling in the answers. Wow, this one's quite split, half and half. Anyone wants to defend the fact side? Any volunteers? Any volunteers to defend the myth side?
I voted myth myself.
Okay.
And I think it's a myth because somewhere it seems easy if it is done correctly, or if the correct path is identified, then it seems easy to do and not effortful.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is what is also shared in the text that in Sri Atma Siddhi Shastra, that it's not necessarily like a lot of time and effort is required, but the right effort is required. And if you do things with the right effort, then the path becomes effortless and enjoyable. And so, so this is another topic that's discussed in the text. So, so thank you all for casting your votes. That was the last question, but thank you for your participation. And so now let's dive a little bit more deeply into like the purpose and context behind the text. And so why was it written? Who was it written by, and for whom was it written? So if we look at the book's history, the scripture was written in 1895 by Srimad Raj Chandraji, who was an enlightened master at that time. And he took the essence of Jainism and put it and condensed it into 142 verses. Srimad Raj Chandraji was a contemporary of Mahatma Gandhi. So in fact, they had a lot of interaction. And Mahatma Gandhi was deeply influenced by the work of Srimad Raj Chandraji, and credits him to being the influencer of for the concept of ahimsa in Mahatma Gandhi's life. And so in 1908, actually, Mahatma Gandhi takes a stab at translating this text into English, so there could be a greater exposure of this text in the world. However, unfortunately, that transcription was lost on a London bus. And so we don't have access to it today, but 125 years later, Pujya Gurudev Sri Rakesh Ji exposes the secrets of Sri Atma Siddhi Shastra in English. And so that was happened during last year in 2021 at the 125th anniversary of this book. And so just wanted to let you know that in case if you're interested in learning more about it, we do have an English translation available for all of you that are interested. But let's take a look at Srimad Raj Chandraji. So this text was written in one single setting of 90 minutes without any breaks or pauses. And this is really significant because if I was to take the text and just like copy it by hand on a piece of paper, it would, and I've tried it before, it has taken me longer than 90 minutes. And if you look at the original manuscript of this text, there's no like crossing out, there's no mistakes. Literally, it came from a place of divinity where this enlightened master just sat and just wrote the text out in one go. If you truly look at it, he was able to fit in like a philosophical debate. He was able to fit in talking about the story of a guru and disciple. He was able to fit in concepts about destiny and free will. He was able to fit in so much content in 142 verses. So it's truly incredible. It's a beautiful piece of work that is truly a scripture. So this text was written in
Parima,
yes.
excuse me, you have 5 minutes. You asked me to let you know when you have 5 minutes.
Sure.
It's time for questions.
Yes.
All right.
I have like 2 more slides to kind of get through, and then I think I can get ready for questions. So it was written in Nadia, Gujarat, which is a place in India. And it kind of goes through these 6 fundamental truths in greater detail, which is the soul exists, the soul is eternal, the soul is the doer of karma, the soul is the receiver of the fruits of karma, there is liberation, and there is a path to liberation. So this is the main content of the text and what the text discusses. So with that, I would like to open the floor up for questions. So.
And you can raise your physical hand or use the hand raise in the reactions.
Yes, double.
Parima, good presentation and good discussion. The question I had is, you mentioned something about Gandhiji trying to translate it earlier and then it getting lost or something. Can you elaborate on that? And then since then until now, until Rakesh Bhai did it, how come no one else has attempted to do that?
Yeah, sure. So exactly. So Mahatma Gandhi was deeply influenced by Srimad Raj Chandraji. He had a letter correspondence with Srimad Raj Chandraji throughout his life until Srimad Rajchandraji passed away. And Sri Atma Siddhi Shastra is the magnum opus of Srimad Rajchandraji's literature. And so Gandhiji attempted to translate it to English. It was lost. I think Gandhiji was the first person to translate it to English, but there have been many other attempts of translating it into other languages, such as Hindi or even Sanskrit, into Sanskrit. And so there have been many people who have talked and studied and written theses on Sri Atma Siddhi Shastra. So it is a text that has been studied deeply by many scholars, but notably, like, Mahatma Gandhi is the most famous of all of them, and he was the first one to translate it directly into English. And then the next one to translate it into English is Pujya Gurudev Shri Rakesh Bhai.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have time for one more question before we go on to our second speaker. One more question? Anyone?
Oh, hey, Parima, is this available in any other language or culture, accessible to any other cultures?
Yeah, absolutely. So this book currently is only this text is only in English right now, but I know that they are working on translations into other languages such as Spanish, German, etc. So stay tuned to for those translations to come out. But the knowledge itself, there are online discourses given on this text, and the online discourses have subtitles in different languages, in case if you're interested.
Thank you, Parima. Thank you very much. Let's all give her a round of applause. And then Ruth, would you like to introduce our
I
speaker?
would.
Okay.
And our second speaker is Mr. Gaurav Rastogi, who has been at Religion Chat before and given interesting talks on Hinduism. We're very happy he's back. And here he is. Where are you, Gaurav?
Namaskar, Ruchi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Namaskar. Thank you very much, and greetings everyone. My name is Gaurav Rastogi, and I'll be talking to you about Ramayana, which is a book that it's a timeless epic from the Hindu tradition, but not limited to the Hindu tradition or the lands of India. And I'll tell you a little bit more about it. I'm going to begin with an invocation. So I'm going to sit and I'll just chant something along. Before you, you're going to see an image of Sri Ram, who is sitting in blue colored skin, and he has a bow in his hand and his beautiful wife to his left. And that's what the invocation is going to say. So you can listen along, just close your eyes. Nilam Bhujashamalako Malangam Sita Samaropitavamabhagam Pano Mahasayakacharu Chapam Namami Ramam Raghuvanshanatham, whose body has the color of the blue lotus and gray, whose body parts are soft to the touch, on whose left side resides Sita, who has the transcendental arrow and beautiful bow in his hands. I pray to that Sri Ram, the ruler of the Raghu dynasty. Ramayana is the story of Ram and his travels through time. This is a story very, very long ago, about 7,000 years ago, by most recent reckoning, and written in Sanskrit. Why this story is important, why people still hold the story very dear, and why this epic is still very revered in the tradition, I will tell you. First, I have to tell you that, to give you a little bit of context, is that we become the heroes that we idolize and idealize, which is to say, the heroes that we hold close to our heart, they shape our personality. The choices those heroes have made, the challenges those heroes have made, the decisions and choices they've had to make, all of those are deeply seated in our heart and they shape our personalities. And so it is said that you have to choose your heroes wisely. And it's with this question, in fact, that all of Ramayana actually begins.
John.
Is she there?
Someone saying something? There's some background noise I'm trying to see. Okay. So we have a choice in one of the Hindu texts. So this is a yoga text. It's called Kathopanishad. There's a choice that we're presented all the time between Shreyas and Preyas, the good and the pleasant. And usually when it is time for us to make the choice between what is the right thing to do, what is good, and what is the pleasant thing to do, we often choose the latter. We choose things that are comfortable because tough choices are hard to make. Things that are pleasant are more easy to make. But a true test of character, a true test of virtue is the ability to make the right decision, the good decision, despite the trade-offs that one has to do. One isn't sitting in a single role. At all points of time in our life, I am a son, a father, a colleague, a leader, a follower, a lover. All of these different roles have different demands. And very often it is that those demands are in conflict with each other. And then at that time, to make a decision, one must have to choose between what's pleasant and what's good. And usually people choose the pleasant. And this choice is framed entirely in the story of the Ramayana. The Ramayana is a very expansive, broad story. And it talks of the journey of one particular person, Sri Ram, and his choices, his growth on the spiritual path, and the choices he's making through this. And the choices, I have to warn you, are not easy to make. They are some of the hardest choices to make, and he does not take them easily. You will hear him crying, you will hear him grieving, you will hear him going through the regular motions of the emotional states that he is having to deal with, the consequences of the choices he's making, but he makes those choices regardless because that's the right thing to do. Because that's the responsibility that he is shouldering. And that's the reason this is an important story from the Hindu tradition. And in the Jain tradition, it's told. In the Buddhist tradition, it's told. It's told in India, Thailand, Malaysia, China. It's told in so many different cultures in so many ways for the specific reasons. Here is someone before us who is making the right choices because they're the right choices, not because they're easy, but because they're hard things to do. All right. Ram is the story of Ram is the Ramayana, and he is called Maryada Purushottama Ram. Maryada Purushottam means the ideal man. This is a person who's fulfilling and balancing multiple identities and roles and playing the role of a role model. He is aware, he is the king of his region, and he is aware of the choices that he's making. And the fact that his choices, not just because he's the ruler, but because he's the most visible person in the kingdom, the choices he makes impact the society. And so for the harmony of the society, he's going to have to make those choices, even if they are personally uncomfortable and extremely, they cause him much grief, but he still makes those choices. And so that's the story we're going to talk through. The original text is the Valmiki Ramayana. This is the English version of that. These are about 24,000 verses in Sanskrit. Now, this is one of the two major epics in the Hindu tradition, the other being the Mahabharata, which is 2,000 years more recent. So this is about 7,000 years. Mahabharata is set about 5,000 years ago. This story is set in northern India. And it is written contemporaneously. The author of this particular version, Valmiki, whose name you're seeing on the screen, Valmiki is not only writing the story, at the end of toward the end of the book, he becomes a part and participant in the book itself. In fact, in the first chapter itself, it turns out that the story he's being told, one of the main characters in the story comes to stay in his ashram, and then the rest of the story is then told in a sort of a sort of flashback type situation. All right. Now the Ramayana has been retold countless times. Like I told you, it is the cultural basis for many Eastern civilizations, not merely the religious basis, but dance performances, annual festivals, the retelling of the story in many different forms is a core cultural practice in many different traditions. In Thailand, for example, there is a very strong culture of enacting the Ramayana. The annual festival calendar. Just this weekend, 2 days ago, was Ram Navami. Ram Navami celebrates the birth of Sri Rama. This is following a 9-day fasting. And then this particular 9th day is the day of his birth. In winter or fall, just before winter, we celebrate the great victory and the returning home from that victory. And that's also celebrated. The big festival, you know, the Hindu festival of lights, Diwali, is set into the same story as well. So you can see that Ramayana plays an active role even in modern society for the Hindus and for many people of Eastern civilizations, not merely the Hindus. Now, these are heroes, and the heroes in this book are celebrated and revered even till the day. So behind me, you're going to see, well, somewhere here, right behind me, when you see a little image of Hanuman, and I'll tell you a little bit about him. He's very well loved in India and in the Hindu tradition at large. And he's one of the heroes coming out of this particular story as well. All right. Now, the beginning of the story is follow the simple question. There's a transcendental sage traveling across the 3 worlds, and this is Narad, sage Narad. He happens to be visiting this earth, and he meets a sage Valmiki, and Valmiki asks him this question. Tell me, does such an ideal person exist today in the modern world? He's looking for someone who has the greatest virtues, highest qualities, who's valorous, who takes the right action. Does such an ideal person exist in the present world today? This is the question that begins this entire Valmiki Ramayana. I'll actually read it out, the whole question out to you. It's not visible on the screen in front of you, but I will read it out to you. So Valmiki, who writes this book eventually, is asking Narad the following question. Tell me, O saint, who is at present the most accomplished, learned, powerful, noble-minded, truthful, firm in vows, of excellent moral character, and of grateful turn of mind, who ministers to the good of every creature, who is well familiar with manners and customs of men, who is peerless, clever, and beautiful to look at, who is not subject to anger or malice, and yet whom when enraged, even the gods fear to face in the battle, and so on. So he is asking and framing this question, tell me who is the ideal man, and then Sage Narad tells him the story of Ram, and then tells him to then prepare, because in his ashram, his wife, Ram's wife, is about to enter and give birth to her 2 twins. And then he tells him, gives him instructions to write this book out, which he does for the next 12 years. And that's how the Ramayana is written as a wonderful story. I'll give you a little outline of the story. There are 4 characters that you need to know a little bit more about. Ram is the main character. Ram, as you saw, blue skin, he's imagined, or he's thought of as having blue skin. He's always carrying a bow and arrow. This is important. He's wearing the clothes of an ascetic because of the story I'll tell you, that he's exiled from his kingdom. And then he is living the life of a hermit with his wife and his younger brother. And this is Ram. His wife is Sita. She is the goddess of wealth personified herself. And she plays an important role. He loves her dearly, and he will lose her a couple of times in this story. And both of the times it breaks his heart. The main enemy of this story is Ravan. Now, usually when in the modern times we say this is a story of good versus evil, it's not actually the case. Good versus evil is not a concept that's actually very basic in the Indian traditions. Ravan is not necessarily evil. He is extremely intelligent. He's extremely materialistic, and he's extremely arrogant. And that's his problem. His problem is his materialism and his arrogance. And his arrogance leads him to destroying the society around him, causing damage to society. And as part of that, he kidnaps Ram's wife, Sita, and takes her to his palace. And then the story, I'm going to tell you the story. And the fourth person you need to know about is Hanuman, who you saw right behind me. And he is one of the heroes of the story as a helper and assistant to Ram and his battle against Ravan. So these are the four people you'll hear. So I wanted you to see their names up front over here. All right. The story is laid out in a few chapters. I'll give you the brief outline of the story. It begins with the question I told you about a few minutes ago. And then we hear of the exploits of the young Ram. Now, Dashrath, Ram's father, is childless for many years. And as a king, he's the king of Ayodhya, the region, and he is childless. And because he is childless, he's unhappy. And he prays for children. And then through his 3 wives, he has 4 sons, Ram, Lakshman, Bharat, and Shatrughan, 4 sons. And those 4 sons grow up into fine young men. And as Ram, who's the first one, is about to come of age and he's going to become king, the mother of the 3rd child becomes jealous. And she has been given 2 promises by her husband. So she goes to encash those promises. She says, you're going to have to make good on those 2 promises. Promise number 1, you're going to banish Ram from the kingdom for 14 years. Promise number 2, my son Bharat is going to become king. And when Dashrath, the father, hears this, he can't believe his ears. He can't understand why this hard thing is being said. And he collapses. But Ram hears about this. And Ram, now this is important for you to hear. He's about to become king, but he hears his father has given his word, his promise, and the promise requires him to now be exiled. And he decides immediately that he will follow through on his father's promise, because it isn't, he does not want to let his father's promise go in vain. And so with his young wife and his brother, who also decide to accompany him, he heads out into the forest. And his father begins to weep unconsolably and eventually dies, never to see his son again. And so Ram, his wife, and Lakshman, the younger brother, head out into the forests and live out into the forest for the next few years, living a very simple life, hermit-like life, and nothing bad happens until the last year. And in the last year, and I should have okay, I'll come back. In the last year, his wife Sita is kidnapped by Ravan for reasons I'm not going to get into too much detail. She's kidnapped by Ravan and taken to Lanka. Lanka, you might know as Sri Lanka now. And she's kept there. And Ram is inconsolable, and he needs to go out in search of his wife. And he hears that his wife is somewhere south, and he begins to travel south. On his way, he meets, this is in Kishkinda, he meets a tribe of monkeys. And he helps out the underdog. There are 2 brothers that are fighting, and he helps out the brother whose side he helps out, and he helps the brother become, get his wife back from his elder brother and so on. And then these monkeys decide to help him. One of those is you're going to see on the screen right here, is Hanuman. Hanuman is one of the generals of the army, and he is strong enough to lift Ram and Lakshman on his shoulders and carry him around. This tribe of monkeys begins to look out for Ram's wife Sita, and we get to the story. I'm almost, and then Hanuman Hanuman has yogic powers. He's able to fly, he's very strong, he's able to become small. All sorts of wonderful, beautiful descriptions are given here. He eventually goes to Lanka and he finds her. And she's safe. She has not yet given in to Ravan. And she's not going to give in to Ravan. She says, kill me instead. And he goes to her, he consoles her, he says, we're going to come and get you. And he comes back. And then eventually, the big fight happens. And Ravan's children are killed. And back and forth, Ravan kills Lakshman, Hanuman goes and gets the magic herbs and revives him. All sorts of stuff happens. And eventually, Ravan is killed at the end of the story. And then they come back. You think it's happily ever after, but it's not. On their way back, before they come back, Ram challenges Sita. He says, look, you've been in another man's unlusty, sort of vigorous man's house for 11 months. How do I know that you're pure? And he challenges her so she could actually go through what's called the fire sacrifice. She lights a fire and she jumps into it. And then the fire god brings her back out because, of course, she's obviously very pure. And so this is a test of purity, and then they come back home. And that's just that. Eventually what happens is they live happily for many years. Ram comes back to rule. And then he realizes that in his kingdom that people are beginning to, social order is breaking down again, because again, people think that he is not tested his wife enough. At which point he decides that social order is more important than his love for his wife. So he sends his wife off to the ashram of Valmiki, which is how you remember the story had begun, much to his grief again. And then there she gives birth to his 2 sons. And then 12 years later, those sons come into the kingdom, they're rediscovered. And you think it's going to be happily ever after, but no, Sita again goes through a test, and this time goes back into the earth and disappears forever. So Ram actually never gets to stay with his wife from that point on. So he loses her twice, both the time grieving. The point of the story is that he's having to make these really tough choices. Every time he needs to make a choice, he needs to choose between that which is pleasant to him, staying on as the king, or keeping his wife, or there are many choices he's making while helping the monkeys as well. All of those choices, he could make the easy choice or the hard choice, and he always makes the harder choice because it's the right thing to do. And that's why this is a wonderful story. It's a story that's retold in so many more ways. In Hindi, so Valmiki Ramayana was written in Sanskrit about 1500, 1600 AD, a few hundred years ago. It was rewritten in Hindi as Tulsi Ramcharitmanas. Hello.
Hello, 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm almost done wrapping up, which is
Okay,
great.
no time for questions. Okay.
So this is retold in Hindi, and that text is very popular. And this is a devotional text. In this text, unabashedly, Ram is written as God incarnate. And it's a completely devotional text. Parts of that are still read in India. I'm sorry, there's somebody saying something. All right, I'm going to keep talking. So readings happen in many family homes all the time. A specific set of verses is recited. All of us know it by heart, the Hanuman Chalisa. And Ramayana readings are very common. And eventually, what the other thing, and Ram Leela, there are annual reenactments of the Ramayana happening every year at a specific time of the year. And I'm about to tell you that even in the Bay Area, you have the opportunity to go visit and see the Ramayana being played out live. In modern popular culture, a few interesting things have happened. Ram, you're seeing on the image over here, blue-skinned, has a bow and arrow, wearing ascetic clothes, hermit-like. He's very popular, and he's become even more popular because as Hinduism revives, Indians and Hindus in general have been sort of under external subjugation of other religions or people from other religions for hundreds of years. So there's a re-emergence of Hindu identity. And Ram, as a renunciate who bears arms, is a very popular image. You're seeing Hanuman in the orange-colored thing over here, right? He's very popular as a deity, and Ram and his wife are very popular in India as well as a resurgent form. A new temple to Ram in the same city where this entire story is set, Ayodhya, a new temple is about to open, and there has been a lot of hue and cry, a lot of excitement in India on that account, and I'm looking forward to going to this temple as well. Additionally, reenactments happen everywhere, including in the Bay Area, where more than 40 years, every year the school children of the Mount Madonna School in Gilroy, Watsonville, they actually enact the entire Ramayana. It's a beautiful production, happens in June every year, happening again this year, live performance, and you should absolutely go see it because of the sheer joy with which it's carried out. And it's in English, and it's joy, and it's amazingly done. I watched a few of those performances. You should go watch it. So that's all I wanted to tell you, that this is the story of the Ramayana, which is an important text in the Hindu tradition. And it's seen as a story that still lives in our hearts. It is a story that still evokes an emotional response. And it's a reminder of the hard choices that you have to make on the spiritual path. Choosing between what's pleasant and what's good is always difficult. So having the right heroes is important. And in Ram, we find the hero that makes the hard choices. I'm done, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Gaurav. Okay, looks like we'll have time for 1 or 2 questions. So if we can go back to gallery. If you have a question, raise your hand or use the raise hand reaction. Anyone?
Okay, while you're thinking of your question, I'll give you a little bit more. The beginning of the story is pretty interesting, like I told you, but there's a story before this story where essentially there's a pun there. From shoka comes the shloka, which is from pain comes the poetry. And so there's a lot of grief in the story. From that grief comes the most evocative story that I've told you. Because Ram himself has to grieve through the entire process of his decision making. And there's a backstory to the author himself and how he came into hearing the story. Okay, questions? Yes, there's a hand raised.
When are these stories read, and are they read to children?
Yes, great question. So the stories are read typically, well, you can read them anytime. Sundarkand people read, which is one of the chapters, is read almost, you could read it at any time. During the summer, typically you have the full reading, the Ramayana part, and 24-hour reading, nonstop. And in fall, which is when the Festival of Lights happen, there's a complete reenactment over a certain number of days, 2 weeks. There's a full reenactment of the story. And that children here get to participate in it, they get to hear it. Bows and arrows are sold, and it's always a fun story. And of course, it ends with Ram arriving back at Ayodhya. So there's a lot of fireworks and lamps and lights and celebrations. So kids are involved in this entire process. There's a new Japanese animation, I believe, that's coming out as well. So I hope kids will be attracted to that.
Okay, thanks. Let's take one more question. Alan, I see your hand.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you. That was interesting, and it just a comment. It kind of strikes me that the story is like the parables in our faith tradition. We hear parables be in the Old Testament or the New Testament, and these parables just express a profound truth. And it seems I can see the parallel between the story that you described and the parables in our Bible and faith. And I think it's a very interesting thing that we all have a way to express that. We don't reenact them necessarily. I don't recall that happening, but actually that would be a really nice thing to have some of these parables that we experience in our faith reenacted, and it's a good way to communicate it to our children. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Thank you. I just want to comment that the story and the reenactments are very important in the continuing of the tradition. The philosophical truths are hard for everyday people to understand and grasp, but stories travel generations far better. And so if you look at Hindus that left India and came to the Caribbean, they kept telling the story to each other, and through that have continued to remain in the tradition over this period of time. If it was just pure dry philosophy, it doesn't really appeal to people that much, but stories travel. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's everyone give a round of applause to Gaurav. Thank you. I have a couple of announcements to make, and then those who want to stay will go into our breakout rooms. So I'd like to announce that our next religion chat is May 11th, and we will be trying something new for us. We're going to be doing a hybrid Zoom plus in person at Livermore Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Hillcrest site in Livermore. So watch your email for details, and it will also be on our Interfaith Interconnect Facebook. The topic will be, how does your community welcome children or youth into the faith? What rite of passage ceremonies are traditional in your culture? Join us to hear the history, ages, and traditions involved in these events. Breakout groups